There's just so much.
You're listening to a Mamma Mia podcast.
Mamma Mia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on.
The following episode contains discussions of violence and child abuse. Listener discretion is advised. It's May 30, 1985, in Burbank, California. Spring is turning to summer, and the wide streets in the San Fernando Valley are lined with their signature palm trees. A 42-year-old woman named Carol Kyle is at home with her 11-year-old son. She doesn't know yet that there is a man in her neighbourhood driving a stolen car. At some stage during the night, in the shadow of darkness, the man enters her home. At gunpoint, he binds Carol's son with handcuffs and ransacks their house, demanding she tell him where her most valuable items are hidden. Once he has collected a number of valuable goods, he rapes Carol, ordering her not to look at him while shouting threats at her. She complies. When he is finished with Carol, he retrieves the little boy and binds him to his mother with handcuffs. Then he flees the scene. Both Carol and her son survive this attack. They are lucky. So far that year, the Night Stalker, as he will come to be known, has killed 6 innocent civilians. The year before, he'd killed 2 others, the youngest being a 9-year-old girl. He is in the midst of one of the most destructive murder-crime sprees in American history. But he isn't like your textbook serial killer. He's a serial rapist, kidnapper, pedophile and burglar, murdering some victims while letting others go. For those who survive, they will never forget his face. It is the face of a monster. I'm Jessie Stevens, and this is True Crime Conversations, a Mamma Mia podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. In today's episode, I'm speaking with homicide detective Gil Carrillo, who helped lead the investigation into Richard Ramirez's horrific crime spree across California in 1985. He most recently appeared on the Netflix documentary series The Night Stalker. I wanted to begin with the first crime scene you attended that was left by the Night Stalker. Do you remember that crime scene and what effect it had on you?
Certainly. It was March 17th, 1985, 8510 Village Lane, city of Rosemead. I remember it very well. It was St. Patrick's Day here in Los Angeles, and I was first up for murders, and I got one. And that's where I went, and that was the death of Dale Okazaki and the wounding of Maria Hernandez. I can remember it very well.
It was a pretty incredible story in that I think luck had a part to play in that story and the survival of one of those women, wasn't it?
Yes, Maria Hernandez was going home that evening, and she opened the garage door, electronic garage door opener. She keyed the door, took her keys back out, and just then she heard what turns out to be a deliberate noise. She turned around, and there was the suspect, Richard Ramirez, walking towards her, point shoulder position, holding a handgun. He was pointing the gun right at her face, and 8 seconds upon hitting that garage door opener, that door closes. She had already hit the garage door, so she has 8 seconds for that garage door to close. And just before it closed, Richard fired the gun. It was pitch dark in there now. The bullet happened to strike the keys that she had in her hands in front of her face. He then pushed her body out of the way, and the door was already unlocked. He entered the condo. So she got up, hit the garage door button on the side wall there. The garage opened up. She ran out of the garage and is running down the alley. When she hears the second gunshot, she then goes around to the front of the condo, fearing that she would go inside there because her roommate was there, Dale Okazaki. Upon going around the front, the suspect exits the front door, doesn't go through the garage, and sees her. There's contact once again. He points the gun at her. They play a little like game using a car is he goes one way, she goes the other. And finally, she just put her hands in the air and told him, "You've already shot me once. Don't do it again." He put the gun by his side and walked away. He did not run. He walked. And that was the introduction to our first case that night.
And that crime scene, was there any evidence left? Was there anything, a description of what the man looked like? What sort of traces did you have that could be helpful in this investigation?
All we had from the very first case was Maria Hernandez is the surviving victim. We sent a staff artist to the hospital and she gave him a description. She verbalized what she felt in her mind's eye. He then committed it to paper. We had a drawing of what the suspect might look like, along with a description, a physical description: tall, thin, light-skinned, Hispanic or Caucasian, curly, disheveled hair, stained gap teeth.
After that night, and I believe that wasn't actually the first, you would discover that there were other crimes committed by the Night Stalker. Can you describe what the next few months looked like from your perspective as someone who is attending these crime scenes and in your head starting to put together that these could be related?
Well, in the beginning, it wasn't as simple as that. Since I went to a couple of the crime scenes, other crime scenes were handled by other agencies because it was Los Angeles County in different jurisdictions. And so I just continued to follow them, and everything was in my head and my head alone. And nobody believed that one man was killing adults and also abducting children. Because by this time, I had him abducting children as well. And that was totally unheard of in criminal history. So there weren't too many believers in Gil Carrillo at the time. I was a young investigator. And so the thought was that I was just a young guy trying to make a name for myself. And it wasn't until later on that people got on board.
And how was he abducting children? What did that look like? Because there were a few cases involving children. What was sort of his method?
From right off a bus bench to entering houses, just as he did when he killed some of the adults. He'd enter at night, he was a prowler, and kidnap them right out of the house without waking adults, and he'd get away.
What made you so sure that these were connected? As you said, it wasn't like he had a specific victim type. What was tying it together in your own mind?
The physical description left by the children, coupled with he was wearing a very specific shoe. We found a shoe print. The shoe print was that of the model of Via 440, which, tracking everything down as we do in homicides, I can tell you without equivocation that on January 9th, 1985, 1,356 pair of model 440 of Via size 11.5, 12 entered the United States and New York for distribution throughout the U.S., of which 6 pair came to the state of California and 1 pair made it to a store in Los Angeles. And it was a new shoe as well, which made it very, very difficult for it to be more than one suspect. When we see it tied in with the murder of the Zazarov couple, and then we see it tied in where children were abducted. We later find it connected with other murders. So it was a key piece of evidence with physical descriptions, coupled with, by now we have ballistics that are matching the different crime scenes. So it all came together.
A few of the crime scenes, in the aftermath, there was a symbol left that was painted or sort of marked on a wall. What was that symbol and what did it mean?
Well, it was the pentagram. He left the pentagram on one of the victim's legs. He left one on a wall. He left it on a wall in a couple of places. And that's the sign of Satanism.
By mid-1985, the cases are speeding up. And in some cases, there are more than one murder in a particular night, which was particularly horrific. Was there any sexual motivation behind the crimes?
In my mind, it was primarily all sexual in nature. When this was all over, I got to go back to a university that I had gone to college at and thank the professor. I took 2 semesters of advanced criminal investigation as it pertained to sex crimes. And sexual deviancy, for purposes of sex crimes, sex is whatever makes you feel good. And the sex motivating him, it appeared when I spoke with profilers from the FBI. I said I was looking for a man that had been rejected by women in his youth. Now he is controlling the children. He could have anything he wanted. And there wasn't much of an argument. The adults, If they acquiesced, they survived, and if they didn't, they died. It's hard to convince a lot of people. Everybody will have a personal opinion. Matter of fact, there was allegedly world-renowned psychologists, one in New York and one from UCLA, a local university here in California, that said that we were wrong. Not one person could be responsible for this. As I said, it had never been documented in criminal history. So now we're telling them, yes, it is. And we showed physically through physical evidence. And later on, after the case was all resolved, they found another case in San Francisco, a 9-year-old little girl, and they made him through DNA. So it was proven once again that he could. There was the first time that man got caught with an animal. They called it crime bestiality from then on. So this is the first time man got caught doing what he was doing.
So for the survivors who you interviewed afterwards, how did they describe the attack as playing out? How did he get into their homes? And did he say anything to them during the attack?
They had no knowledge how he got in. Only finding out after, through police investigation, did they see, he entered through a window, he entered through a back door. They were not familiar with how he got in that particular night of the event. We found some commonalities in words that were spoken. Initially, when victims would start to cry or scream, it was 3 statements. Shut up, bitch, where's the money and where's the jewelry? And that's about the only thing he verbalized to him. There was one victim who looked back up at him and said, don't you have a mother? It was an elderly lady. He was had his knees on her chest and looked right in the eye and said, don't you have a mother? Don't you feel like this is wrong? And he got up and he left.
There was one case that's shown in the documentary of a young girl who was abducted by him and taken elsewhere. What was her experience? What happened to her?
She was abducted. Initially, upon being carried out, she just was a little child. She thought maybe it was an adult family member, somebody, an adult. She was used to being picked up as an adult. They took her out. He took her for a ride, and in that car, he opened up the glove box and showed her that there was a gun inside, which made her fearful, and so she just did what he said. Once she arrived at their destination, he had her climb into a duffel bag and told her to be quiet, and he carried her upstairs and took her into a room, sexually assaulted her in there. When he was done, he put her back in the duffel bag, walked her out, carried her back into the car, drove a little distance, and then let her out and pointed her to a gas station that was across the street, said, go in there, ask them to dial 911, get your family, get some help. The little girl had to go to the hospital and be treated, and she's now a very successful adult. At that time, she was the sharpest, cutest young lady that I had ever met. Her assault, since it wasn't a murder, wasn't my case. It belonged to another jurisdicting agency, and there was a female that had conducted the investigation. We were having a lineup that night. So she was brought down there, and I asked her parents if they would facilitate an introduction, since I was so big and she was so small, and she was coloring. And they said, I remember them saying, sweetheart, we'd like you to meet somebody. And she turned around, she says, oh, I know him. That's Detective Gil Carrillo. He's working on the Night Stalker case. I've seen him on the news. My own children didn't watch the news. My own kids when they were in college didn't watch. Here's a little 6-year-old girl who knew exactly who I was. She had no idea she was part of the Night Stalker case, but she knew who I was and knew what I was investigating. She positively identified him that night. We went back to her house a few months later in preparation for the preliminary hearing. And after talking to her that day, it was decided that the cases against all the children would be dismissed. There was no reason to put the children or their families through the court system, through the agony, when we already had enough with the murders.
Do you have any idea why the Night Stalker chose to murder some victims and let others go?
He just admitted that if they acquiesced to his commands, they survived. And if they put up a struggle, they didn't. The men were just killed because they were the obstacle to get to his true lust, which was the women in the house.
You're listening to True Crime Conversations with me, Jessie Stevens. I'm speaking with homicide detective Gil Carrillo, who helped catch California's infamous Night Stalker. By the end of 1985, I believe, it was getting to 13 people who had been murdered by the Night Stalker. How did you eventually obtain a fingerprint, which ultimately led you to finding him?
The last case that he had committed 1 week prior, there was a young man who was working on his bike, saw Richard driving by and was driving slow, looked a little suspicious, so he wrote down a license number. That license number was given to us by the agency that was down in an entirely other county in Southern California. The information was given to us. The car was discovered parked and abandoned. It was picked up. It was transported back down to Orange County where the crime occurred. They were able to lift the fingerprint. The only problem was at that time in 1985, felony convictions, felony arrests were automated. Misdemeanors had not been automated as of yet. So we have a fingerprint, but we have nothing in a computer. We were able to get a name from an informant up in San Francisco, and they hand searched, and they found 8 Richard Ramirez's, and they found 1 to match the print of the Ramirez we have in custody.
Can you describe how he was actually arrested, like how you managed to get him?
He was identified publicly Friday, August the 30th in the evening. By this time, we had identified him. We knew where he hung out, what his life would be like. So we had cops positioned around a Greyhound bus depot down in downtown Los Angeles, which is where he used to hang around, is in the seedy part of town. He had a locker that he rented there, and that's where he kept, we called it his kill kit, a duffel bag with the clothes he would put on. And so we had an operation going around that bus depot. What we didn't know is he had been in Arizona trying to visit a brother. When he didn't locate his brother, he got on a Greyhound bus. He now is riding back to Los Angeles Friday night when we're putting this picture out on the local news. So he's in a bus, doesn't see it. He comes in Saturday morning into the Greyhound bus depot, unbeknownst to him. But the informant had already told us he'll make cops because you can dress dirty, you'll hang in the seedy part of town, but your hair is not dirty. You don't smell. You don't have rotted teeth. He'll make you. And so when he exited the bus, he saw the inside of the passenger area, and he could see there were too many people there that didn't belong. He walked out the way the bus drove in. So he was able to get away from the bus depot, and he saw his picture on the morning paper, and he was able to get on the local transit system. If he'd have rode 8 miles, he would have made it to his brother's house. But a passenger on that bus, who was also reading the morning paper, took a look at him. Richard knew he had been made. That passenger got off. There was a phone booth right next to the bus stop where he stopped. He got off, and he could see him dialing 911 at the time. And Richard went another couple of stops, jumped off. But by this time, the chase was on. And he started jumping fences, ran across the 5 freeway, which at that time was 5 lanes in either way of a highway, and over 10-foot sound walls. He made it over everything. He probably about a 2-mile run. He's tired. He tried to steal a car from a lady. He was going to carjack her, and he tried dragging her out. She started screaming. Her husband heard. He grabbed a piece of metal that was by his front fence and went over and hit him on the head. Richard tried running away. By this time, the neighbors saw him, the fight going on, so they chased him down. He was tired. Then he just made him lay there on the ground. They surrounded him until the cops got there, and he was handcuffed.
This was a man who you had been chasing, who'd really taken over your life in a lot of ways, and you just kept getting call after call to attend a crime scene or that this might be related. What does it feel like when you look that man in the eye and you have seen what he's done, how much pain he's caused so many people? Can you describe that moment when you actually lay your eyes on him?
It was just a look. It was just a feeling of satisfaction. I didn't have the ability to go through so much emotion because I'm a professional. You have a job to do, and that job is to try and get as much information or handle the case. Your work has just begun. Just because you have him in custody, that doesn't mean anything. The work has really begun because now you're put under a time constraints because of the criminal justice system. So I didn't have one opinion outside of that interview that we were about to conduct about anything else. Anything he had done, I really didn't care about at that time. It was a different focus altogether.
What was his disposition? How did he come across? Was he what you expected?
I had no expectations. I didn't know what I was going to get. I had never interviewed somebody that had killed this many people. I had never spent time with somebody that was into Satanism. I knew one thing. I knew he was human and nothing more. He was just another man. And so we did it. And I think it came out in the documentary. There was at one point in time, I was actually literally playing with his anxiety level. I wanted to see how high I could take him and keep him down. So I knew how to structure my questions if we were going to get into anything more. And as I'm doing this, I was getting into a sensitive area, and he started taking deep breaths. He had his head laying down on a table, and his hands were out in front of him, and they were clenched fists. And he, almost to the point of hyperventilation, he started, and he started doing that. And for a millisecond, I admit, I laugh at it today, but for a millisecond there, I'm just starting to think, if this guy starts floating around this room, if he starts levitating, I'm out of here. I've been shot at, I've been stabbed, I've been in fights, but I'm not going to fight somebody that's floating around the room. And so I got a little concerned for a millisecond. Then I just, once again, kill, he's human. That's all it was. And so it was fine.
Did he confess?
He talked in the third person, not a confession. He would sit there and say things like, well, the stalker may have done this, or the Night Stalker may have done that, not admitting he was the stalker. After conviction, after sentencing, my partner and I spent several days with him talking, probably about 4 or 5 days. We'd go visit him every day. And during those conversations, we talked about some of the cases, and he talked about them openly.
Having spent time with him, do you think he's evil? Do you believe in evil?
Oh, yes. I believe people are evil. As a Christian, if I believe in God, that faith is having belief in something that really common sense says isn't so. So, we don't question Buddhism or Muslims or any other form of religion. What he was believing in is just nothing more than another form of religion.
What was Richard Ramirez convicted for? How many murders was he convicted for, and what was his sentence?
There were 13 counts of murders. There was a total of 43 counts between robbery, sexual assaults, and with weapons. There was 43 counts. He was convicted on everything we alleged. His sentence was, he was sentenced to death plus, and don't ask me how the judicial system works. It came out to be death plus like 150 years or something. In case he didn't get the death penalty, he had to stay that long in prison. I really didn't care. When he came back guilty, then my job was over with for the time being. That day was lifting a ton of weight off my shoulders. I had a chance to finally relax a little bit. And in fact, that night I became very emotional. It was the first time in my life as an adult male I cried. I was just so elated, so happy that everything that we had gone through was now worth it.
Finally, I just wanted to ask, this was 35 years ago. How has this case stayed with you as a human being?
Well, it was part of my life. It was a very, very big part of my life for 6 months during the investigation. Then later on during trial, it impacted myself. It impacted my family. My family had moved out of the house for a while. So everything that was going on is there. It's a memory, just like those people that have memories of being in combat. You have those memories that are with you. They're there. They're etched in my brain. They'll be there forever. And I've lectured enough on this case, having traveled all around the U.S. and out of the country a couple of times. So you memorize it. It just comes naturally, It doesn't go away. And then with this documentary, it seems that everything was resurrected, and I'm doing a lot more talking about it today.
Gil Carrillo investigated between 700 and 800 murders in his 38 years as a homicide detective. He was the first detective to link the Night Stalker's crimes to one another and helped lead the investigation that brought Richard Ramirez to justice. For more information on this case, you can stream Night Stalker, The Hunt for a Serial Killer on Netflix. True Crime Conversations is a Mamma Mia podcast hosted by me, Jessie Stevens. Sound design is by Ian Camilleri, and our producer is Gia Moylan. If you'd like to find out more about the show, don't forget to join our online community. Just search for True Crime Conversations on Facebook and make a request to join.